The moment the senator leaned forward, the entire hearing room shifted. It wasn't quiet anymore. It wasn't careful. It wasn't political theater. It felt like someone had finally walked into a locked room and flipped on every light at once. Her voice didn't rise, but the temperature in that chamber did. Because in less than a minute, she made something very clear. Whatever facade of order still existed inside the Department of Justice was about to crack open right in front of the country. And nobody sitting at that table expected what was coming. Most hearings drag on with predictable speeches, polite disagreements, and carefully rehearsed answers.
We're joined by the Vice Chairman of the full committee. Senator Murray is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Bondi, we are in a deeply alarming moment where law and order is being replaced by chaos and corruption and really whatever Trump wants. And your department's independence and its capacity to do its job have eroded before our eyes. We have seen respected career officials who've been fired for doing their job. Thousands more are being pushed out with your buyouts and the threat of mass firings, and entire divisions are being eliminated, and grants have been canceled illegally. So I have questions about how and why those decisions are being made, and importantly, whether you're adequately resourcing DOJ to do its job. But before I turn to my questions, I do want to raise my alarm about the troubling pattern of trampling basic rights. Detainees, including U.S. citizens, being shipped overseas without any due process. Elected officials are detained for conducting oversight, and a U.S. senator gets tackled to the ground for asking questions at a press conference. This is not the country I know or the values I believe in, and I hope that colleagues on both sides of the aisle will agree with that. Now, to the questions. Yesterday, and I know that Senator Van Hollen raised this issue, a former DOJ attorney filed a protected whistleblower complaint accusing Deputy AG Emil Bove and senior DOJ leadership of defying court orders, including through, quote, lack of candor, deliberate delay, and disinformation, unquote. The complaint also accuses this administration of firing the whistleblower for, quote, telling the truth to the court. These allegations are deeply concerning. Now, I know you said that you can't discuss the case, but can you confirm that you agree that this administration should follow court orders?
We will follow court orders, Senator. The entire administration will follow court orders. The problem arises in the district courts. All these district courts throughout the country are tying our hands. But here's how we will follow them when we get to the United Supreme Court.
I need to ask
we're winning.
A number of questions.
And so, yes, we're following the orders of the court.
Let me ask my questions. Can you confirm you will not allow any conduct like what is alleged to continue at the DOJ?
I'm not going to talk about anything that's alleged. What I will talk about with you, hold on, you asked me a question and I get to answer it. What you asked me, alleged conduct that's part of a pending whistleblower lawsuit that was filed on the eve prior to Emil Bove's hearing today.
I'm not asking about that
suspicious.
Case
hold on, let me keep going. I would run through a wall for Emil Bove and Todd Blanche.
Like to continue with my questions. I have very limited time. Thank you. I just want you to confirm for this you will not allow conduct like that at the DOJ. Yes or no?
I will always support and defend Emil Bove, and I will defend Todd Blanche. They are two of the finest people I know and two of the ethical people I know.
I was asking about the conduct. Let me keep going here. Now, in April, DOJ abruptly terminated over 300 public safety grants that had already gone through a very rigorous and fair and apolitical application process with no explanation. This is funding to investigate and prosecute drug trafficking, to support foster care kids who experienced abuse or neglect, to expand access to forensic exams to prosecute violent crimes like sexual assault. These really senseless cancellations have already forced public safety organizations to cut employees and services. So I want to ask you, when you cut off the community-based violence intervention and prevention initiative funding, were you aware it is used to prevent and reduce violent crime?
Yeah, Senator, you weren't here for that, so I'm going to have to repeat myself. We have cut grants. I think we've cut 6%. But if we have cut a grant that you feel should not be cut, please reach out to me. I will personally look at it. We've turned multiple grants back on.
Okay.
We have an appeal process, but if you want to come to me directly, I would be happy to sit down with you and look
I'm
at that
happy to
and
do
help
that.
you.
I'm
Because,
happy. I appreciate
again, we're
that,
doing
but-
everything we can.
Okay, but let me just ask you, when you cut off the expanding access to sexual assault forensic examination grant, were you aware that that grant helps our authorities prosecute rape and sexual assault?
I have no idea about that specific grant you're talking about. That's why I said, if you want to come sit down with me, I would never cut a grant
I appreciate
intentionally
that. It's
that
very
has
hard
anything
for those
to do.
recipients on the other end across the country.
Can you
to
give me
get a
the
phone
details of
interview.
that grant?
I can absolutely do that, and my staff will get that to you, but those are two critical ones that I just wanted to ask you about today.
Again, we've turned many grants back on and will continue to. If you want to call me and we can discuss them with you.
Okay, in your budget request, you propose consolidating the Office on Violence Against Women into the Office of Justice Programs. In 2002, Congress actually codified the office as a permanent, separate, and independent office to implement the Violence Against Women Act. We did that to make sure that violent crimes against women receive the necessary attention, expertise, and resources, and to give the office a strong, independent voice within the Justice Department and federal government. Now, your department wants to fade that into the OJP, which violates the intent of the law that we passed. It makes grant programs less effective, and it places a lot more barriers for victims and services they need. And I see that you're cutting the office's resources by about a third. So will you commit to us, the Appropriations Committee, to follow the law and maintain OVW as a separate grant entity?
I will follow the law, but I will not keep that as a separate grant entity. You and I can disagree all day long on what the law is.
Well,
that's being consolidated into the Office of Justice Programs.
so if
I'm
you're-
not going to cut, let me answer, I'm not going to cut anything that's going to hurt violence against
Not
women.
my question.
It will
I'm
eliminate
asking, just for your information, Attorney General, in 2002, we codified the office as a permanent, separate, and independent office. So that you need to go back and take a look at that. I know my time is out, but I thank you very much for the time.
But not this time. This one started with an explosion. The senator didn't ease into her questions or dance around the issues. She launched straight into a chilling warning that something fundamental in America had shifted. Careers erased. Senior officials forced out. Entire divisions gutted. Critical programs silently erased without explanation. It wasn't disorder. It wasn't chaos. It was intentional. For months, people whispered that something inside the DOJ had changed, but the details were scattered. Rumors, headlines, leaks, nothing concrete. But that morning, those scattered warnings snapped into focus. The senator listed them out one after another, not as speculation, but as facts no one in the room could ignore. And the person sitting across from her, the highest legal authority in the room, knew she was about to be pressed harder than she'd ever been pressed before. But the most unsettling part wasn't the firings. It wasn't the canceled grants. It wasn't even the vanishing independence of the department. It was the moment the senator described Americans, citizens, being taken into custody and shipped away without due process. It was the moment she recalled elected officials being detained for trying to perform oversight. And the moment she mentioned another senator physically tackled by federal security simply for asking a question at a press conference. This wasn't a list of mistakes. It sounded like a government quietly testing the limits of how far it could go in the dark. The Attorney General tried to sit still, tried to project confidence, but you could read the discomfort in her eyes long before she opened her mouth. Because the senator wasn't just asking questions. She was laying out a pattern that suggested the Department of Justice, the institution meant to ensure fairness and uphold the rule of law, was becoming something else entirely. But none of that compared to what came next. Just when the room seemed to settle, the senator brought up a whistleblower complaint, brand new, filed less than 24 hours earlier. Not just any complaint. One accusing top officials of ignoring court orders, delaying justice, and feeding misinformation to the legal system itself. And according to the complaint's claims, the person behind it was fired for telling the truth to the court. The Attorney General tried to brush it off, tried to say she couldn't discuss it. tried to claim it was tied to an ongoing case. But the senator wasn't asking her to litigate. She was asking something simple. Will you commit to stopping conduct like this in your department? Will you guarantee that this kind of behavior will not continue? A yes or no question. But instead of answering, the Attorney General pivoted into praise for the officials named in the complaint, talking about how much she respected them, how fiercely loyal she was to them. It wasn't reassurance. It wasn't commitment. It was avoidance. And judging by the shift in the room, everyone heard that silence loud and clear. The senator cut the dodge short. She didn't raise her voice, but her tone tightened. She reminded the Attorney General that her time was limited, that the American people deserved an answer, and that loyalty to individuals could not replace loyalty to the law. Once again, she asked the question. And once again, no real answer came back. And if that exchange wasn't revealing enough, the next section of the hearing peeled back an even darker layer. The deliberate termination of more than 300 public safety grants. These weren't obscure or outdated programs. These were lifelines for communities. Funding used to investigate drug trafficking. Programs designed to protect abused and neglected children. Grants that kept forensic nursing teams functioning and allowed authorities to investigate violent crimes, especially sexual assault. These cuts were sudden, quiet, and according to many states, completely unexplained. When confronted, the Attorney General tried to minimize the damage, claiming the department only cut 6%. But the senator, who had spoken to the people impacted, knew better. Cities across the country had already lost staff. Child protection units were shutting down programs. Victim support centers were cutting services. And when the senator asked why the funding had been pulled, the Attorney General insisted that if any grant shouldn't have been cut, the senator could come talk to her privately, and she'd look into it personally. That answer didn't calm anyone. It raised a much more disturbing question. Why was the DOJ making decisions that even the Attorney General couldn't explain? And then the hearing reached one of its most uncomfortable moments. The senator asked specifically about the elimination of a grant designed to support forensic examinations for sexual assault cases. This grant is essential. It provides trained professionals who collect evidence, support survivors, and help prosecutors build cases against violent offenders. When asked if she knew that grant had been cut and whether she understood the consequences, the Attorney General admitted she had no idea. She didn't know the program existed. She didn't know it supported survivors. She didn't know it helped prosecutors. She didn't know why it had been removed. The room went hollow for a few seconds. Because how does the head of the Justice Department not know about a decision that undermines the prosecution of violent sexual crimes? How does a leader responsible for public safety admit she has no idea what her own department is doing? And the senator didn't let that silence pass. She promised to send the details. She promised to follow up. She pressed the point that these cuts were not minor, not procedural, and not mistakes. They were damaging the ability of entire communities to fight violent crime. But even that wasn't the most alarming part. The next topic was the Office on Violence Against Women, a critical agency created to protect and support survivors of domestic abuse, trafficking, and sexual violence. 2 decades earlier, Congress made this office permanent, independent, and insulated from bureaucratic restructuring so victims could have a dedicated advocate within the federal system. Yet, the DOJ had proposed consolidating it into a larger office, stripping it of its authority and independence. A move directly opposite of what Congress intended, and one that would unquestionably make support harder to access for countless survivors. When the senator asked the Attorney General whether she would maintain the office as its own entity, the Attorney General flatly refused. She said she would follow the law, but she would not keep it separate, claiming consolidation was necessary. The senator reminded her that the law explicitly required the office to remain independent. The Attorney General insisted on her interpretation of the law anyway. It was one of those moments where everyone watching realized the truth wasn't complicated. It wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't interpretation. The law was clear, and the Attorney General was choosing to ignore it. The tension between them became almost physical. The senator, calm but unwavering, reminded her again that Congress codified the office as separate in 2002. Permanent, independent, protected from exactly the kind of bureaucratic erasure the DOJ was trying to force through. And yet the Attorney General continued insisting she would merge it anyway. At that point, the pattern was unmistakable. First, disregard for career officials. Then, unexplained mass firings. Then, violations of due process. Then, whistleblower claims of defying court orders. Then, the unexplained termination of public safety programs. Then, ignorance about funding for sexual assault investigations. And finally, an outright refusal to honor Congress's legal protections for survivors. Piece by piece, the senator laid out a picture that was impossible to ignore, a department where accountability had evaporated, where decisions were being made without explanation, and where loyalty to internal allies mattered far more than loyalty to the law. By the end of the hearing, the Attorney General had avoided almost every direct question. She insisted the department was following court orders, even as allegations suggested otherwise. She insisted the department was supporting public safety, even as she admitted she didn't know what grants had been cut. She insisted the restructuring of the Violence Against Women Office would not harm victims, even as it clearly violated the intent of federal law. And the senator, who had entered the room with facts, documents, and the weight of communities behind her, laid out something the country needed to hear. This wasn't incompetence. It was transformation. A slow, deliberate shift in how justice was being handled in America. A shift away from transparency, accountability, and independence, and toward something far more dangerous. As the hearing closed, the senator thanked the committee and yielded her time. But the silence that followed wasn't normal. It wasn't procedural. It was the kind of silence that settles in only when people have realized they've seen something they weren't supposed to see. Something they can't easily forget. That if you're watching this, ask yourself, what happens when the system meant to protect you refuses to follow its own rules? What happens when loyalty replaces law? What happens when the people in power stop answering questions altogether? Because hearings like this aren't just political moments. They're warnings that if you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The next video goes even deeper, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.